It's me. Sorry.
I can't believe the kid busted out of there. Can't believe he's still alive.
Let's go call the kid. If he's kidnapped, he's in the house on Highway U. Both his legs are broken and his ankle.
The first words out of his mouth was, "Oh, he's still alive." I think Joe thought that I was gonna die that night. He'd come home and I'd be dead. Extremely painful, almost unbearable.
On the 4th of July 1994, a 14-year-old boy named Chris Steiner went missing from his home in Baraboo, Wisconsin. The next morning, his parents found that he was no longer in his bed. They searched their house, but Chris was nowhere to be found. As they looked around, they noticed some things that made them feel like something was wrong. The downstairs window was left open with a large slash in the screen, and there was a muddy shoe impression outside in the dirt under the window. Inside the house, there were muddy footprints on the carpet. All of these clues led them to suspect foul play, but when they informed the police, they were told that Chris had probably snuck out to meet up with his friends, as he had done in the past. Now, you see, Chris's parents reluctantly accepted this explanation, but their worst fears were realized 6 days later. Yes, the boy's body was found draped over a half-submerged tree in the Wisconsin River. The body was almost unrecognizable because of the heavy decomposition and bloating from the water, and the dental records confirmed that it was Chris, and the medical examiner determined that he had drowned, but the manner of his death was left undetermined. Now, after that, the case eventually went cold. Yep, there was nothing to be heard about it until almost exactly 1 year later, on July the 29th, 1995. 13-year-old Thaddeus Phillips had moved into the area 2 weeks prior with his family. After heading out for dinner with his family, he fell asleep on the couch next to his sister while they watched TV. But little did he know that something terrible was going to happen to him that night. Thad found himself being carried through his house half asleep, believing it was his father taking him to bed, as he had done many times before.
And I opened up my eyes a little bit, and I'm being carried through my den in our new house, and it's nothing really new to me because my mom and dad carried me to bed when I'd fall asleep before.
But he soon realized that this was not the case when the person carrying him took him outside and told Thad to follow him. The groggy and confused boy believed that this must be his family friend who needed help and was unable to wake his father up. Thad followed the unknown person into the night without any questions. He thought to himself that this person must be having car troubles. Thad followed the unknown person about a mile away to a rundown house. When they arrived, he followed the person inside, and it was described as a dump, with trash everywhere, garbage, old food, and old dishes. Parts of the floor that were missing were covered with boards. Thad noticed that the person with him looked like a teenager, and when asked what they were doing, the person said that they'd be having a party here tonight. He listed a number of names that Thad recognized as friends from school and said that they would all be arriving very shortly. The unknown teenager introduced himself and said that his name was Joseph Clark, the same Joe Clark that was suspected in the disappearance of Chris Steiner a year back. Now, things didn't really happen like you would expect. It was quite the opposite, but not in a great way too.
I don't know how to explain that. I can't explain that. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know why. I was looking around, he was being the nicest guy in the world.
Joe Clark was friendly at first, but as Thad looked at the model cars, something changed in Joe. His demeanor shifted, and before Thad knew it, he was thrown onto the bed and under attack. The pain that Thad felt as Joe twisted his foot and broke the bone was excruciating. The sound of his own bone snapping will forever be etched into his memory, but the pain didn't stop there. Joe continued to attack Thad, breaking his femur and causing him unimaginable pain. And yet, even in the midst of this torture, Joe would switch between violent outbursts and friendly conversations, leaving Thad confused and unsure of how to act.
Kind of looked away, and as soon as he looked away, I got up and ran as fast as I could down the stairs. Can't run very fast with a broken ankle.
As Thad lay there in agonizing pain, he couldn't help but wonder why Joe was doing this to him. And when Joe revealed that he enjoyed the sound of bones breaking, Thad couldn't believe it. It was as if he was being tortured for Joe's sick entertainment. Now, coming all this way, you'll be getting how Joe was a predator, a monster in fact, who took pleasure in torturing children, and Thad had been his latest victim. The first night, Joe broke Thad's ankle, twisting it until it snapped. But that was just the beginning. Over the course of the next day, Joe would torture him again and again, breaking bones and beating him until he could barely breathe. And then he would cover up the injuries with layers and layers of white socks, meticulously aligning to look like a makeshift cast. Now, as you watch this episode, we can't help but feel sickened by the cruelty of it all. I mean, how could someone do this to another human being? And what makes it worse is that Joe had done this before.
And I asked him if he'd done this to anybody else, and he said yeah.
Yes, Thad found out that he was just one of 3 boys that Joe had held captive and tortured in the same way. Now, during all of this, Joe had forced Thad into leg braces that were meant to help him walk, but instead, they caused excruciating pain. Joe seemed to take pleasure in watching Thad suffer as he struggled to move around the house. This went on for a whole day, with Joe repeating this cycle of torture. Thad's suffering didn't stop there. Joe would perform a bizarre ritual with socks, and then there would be a calm period where Joe acted like they were old friends. By nightfall, Thad's legs had become incredibly swollen, with one ankle the size of a softball and the other close to a basketball. Joe left Thad on the upstairs bed and disappeared. Thad, sensing an opportunity to escape, crawled out of bed and over to the stairs. He tried to make it down the stairs but couldn't, and ended up falling headfirst to the bottom. Thad passed out and couldn't remember how many times he did so as he crawled through the living room. When Joe returned with a female companion, Thad lay still in terror, hoping not to be discovered. But Joe saw him and dragged him back upstairs. This time, Joe attacked Thad with unbelievable fury, twisting his already swollen ankles all the way around again, and jumping up and down on his chest until almost all of Thad's ribs were either bruised or broken. Despite his injuries, Thad never gave up. He held on to the hope of seeing his family again, and that's what kept him going. Now, one night when Joe planned on leaving for outside, he locked Thad into a dark, junky closet. Now, what happened next really showed how faithful Thad was. He managed to break open the locked door using an old wooden guitar and crawled through the living room to the kitchen. He found a working phone through which he dialed 911. He told the operator that he was being held captive by Joe Clark. The operator dispatched officers immediately. The first officer who arrived at the house found Thad in the kitchen near the phone.
Dad?
Here, it's me.
Sorry.
With his left knee completely backward and his feet sideways. He was shocked at the condition Thad was in and placed him on a stretcher. Thad recalls waking up in the hospital where the doctors described his injuries as something they would only see in a particularly bad car crash. He had seriously life-threatening internal bleeding and was only a few hours away from dying. It's a miracle that Thaddeus survived, but the emotional and physical scars will be with him for the rest of his life. Now, after all this, Joe was charged with attempted first-degree homicide, causing great bodily harm to a child, causing mental harm to a child, and child enticement. These charges were just the tip of the iceberg. Joe was a registered sex offender in Wisconsin, and during his trial, it was revealed that he had done the same thing to 2 other boys. But that's not all. Chris Steiner's case was reopened after Thad, the victim in Joe's trial, told the police that Joe had also done the same thing to Chris. Chris's body was exhumed, and it was discovered that he had 4 breaks in his legs that were almost identical to the ones Thad had suffered. It was believed that Joe lured Chris out of his house, crushed his legs, and threw him into the river, making it impossible for him to swim. But that's not all. During the investigation, a journal was found in Joe's room, and it contained 3 columns titled Get to Know, Can't Wait, and Leg Thing. Under each column were the names of 29 boys who lived in the area. This discovery was chilling, and it made everyone wonder how many more victims Joe had. Now, during Joe's trial for Chris's murder, his alibi was heavily scrutinized. Joe's mother believed that he was at home sleeping, but there were multiple instances where people said that Joe had snuck out without her knowing. Additionally, Joe bullied his peers viciously at school, and a teacher even claimed that Joe made a death threat to them via telephone. Now, apart from those charges, Joe was again found guilty and received a life sentence plus 40 years. But justice was not enough. The community was left to wonder how someone like Joe could have committed such heinous acts. Was it due to his biological mother's drug use during pregnancy? Was it because of the head injury he sustained when he was 15? Or was it simply because he was a monster? What do you think?